What's going on, everybody? This episode, we'll be talking about my opinion on carry pistol modifications, specifically with Glocks, and what I think they need, and what I have done with my Model 19 that I'm carrying right now. But first, let's talk about a cool rifle I saw in the shop the other day. I'll put some photos of this rifle on Instagram after I publish this episode. And I wish I had gotten more photos of the markings and all that, but I got a chance to handle. It was an original World War II era Enfield sniper rifle, and I don't know a whole lot about these. Like I said, I wish I would have taken some more pictures and all that. And the proof marks and all that kind of stuff. I don't know that much about them. I was kind of in a pinch. I didn't have a whole lot of time, but it was a really cool rifle. This rifle was built on a Mark IV action. And from what I've done some reading and research online after coming home and looking at the pictures I took of it and reading online about them, I believe it would have been done by the Royal Small Arms Factory. And again, I didn't look at the proof marks and that kind of stuff. I wish I had. But I believe it was done by the Royal Small Arms Factory, which makes it fairly rare. There's only 1,403 of these sniper rifles built by the Royal Arms Factory. And I say this having not looked at the proof marks as well as I should, but it is my understanding that the rifles converted by Holland and Holland, which were much more numerous, they removed the rear sight on the Enfield on the action and ground away the mount to make the mount for the scope. And this rifle still had the micrometer flip-up rear sight installed underneath of the scope. But unfortunately, I don't know enough about them to say for sure. And since I didn't have all day to stand around and gawk at it, I didn't get as many photos or as much information as I should have. But still, it was a really cool rifle. It's the only one that I've ever seen in person, as a matter of fact. And I'm a bit of a World War II history buff, so getting to check out World War II rifles is always pretty cool for me. Anyway, still ain't spring here yet. I'm recording out in the camper again today. It's about 18 degrees out right now. It's a little later in the evening than what I would have liked, so the sun's coming right in the window of the camper. Hopefully it doesn't make the video quality too bad, but again, we're working with what we got. Yeah, spring isn't here yet. We're supposed to see, we had 8 below the other morning. We're supposed to see 4 below again this weekend. And it's not spring yet. I know it's coming. Almost then, first week of May, end of the first week of May. And it's mostly been in the 30s here. Not as warm as what we'd like to see. But with the spring in the air, it's getting there. It's coming. We all know it's coming. It'll be here eventually. I'm really hoping to be able to go out and do a bear bait this spring. And in preparation for that, I dug out my Marlin 1895 GBL, which is topped with a 1:6 by 24 LPVO from Skinner Sights. Really nice little scope for the money, and it has a much more traditional crosshair setup instead of the goofy crosshairs we often see on the more budget-friendly LPVOs. I had a couple boxes of the Hornady 325 grain lever revolution ammo on hand, and I'm not a fan of that ammo, and I decided to go ahead and sight the rifle in for that ammo so I can get it shot up. Just real quick, I'm not saying that I don't like the Hornady lever revolution ammo or the 4570 ammo just because of it being bad ammo. It's great ammo, and it pushes that 325 grain bullet at an advertised 2,050 foot per second. Sure, that bullet's a little bit lighter than what I would normally like in a 4570, but it's good ammo. The reason I'm not a fan of this ammo is in order to use their Spitzer bullet, they trim the cases back 1/10 of an inch. And it doesn't hurt anything. I don't like it. It doesn't hurt anything. Again, it's not a bad thing as far as the ammo goes. My issue is as a hand loader, I don't like having that brass around because when loading it, it won't crimp right compared to regular length brass. And this can cause big issues in a heavy recoiling rifle or even a pistol if it's not noticed. Hornady does this on a couple of their other rounds as well, so it's something to keep an eye out for if you are reloading and you have Hornady brass on hand. Anyway, I dialed the rifle in at 100 yards off the bench, and was shooting groups with that ammo around 2 inches with that ammo, which I'm plenty happy with that for a 45-70. You know, for a 45-70 distance is 150 yards or so. I've never actually done a bear bait before, but I have a couple of ideas for it. The place I'm looking at doing my bait station allows me to shoot both grizzly and black bears off of a bait, and I know there are bears there because I have seen them while I'm out there cutting wood during the summer. My plan is to use sweet feed, like goat feed or oats mixed with molasses, for the main part of the bait, along with whatever other sweet stuff I can get my hands on. Sweet feed is cheaper than dog food up here, and while popcorn is light and cheap, I just don't think it's the best option from my research. From what I've read and my small amount of experience with bears, you know, just living up here and everything, the black bears seem to come into sweet sense and grizzlies come into stink. So I want to have all those. So for those bases covered, for having those bases covered, start that one over. I have the bases covered for sweet with a couple buckets of jelly donut filling, molasses, and Kool-Aid powder. But I'm still working on the stink part. My original idea was to go kill some rabbits and put the guts, hide, other unusable bits in like an onion bag, and then bend over a sapling, tie it to the top, and let the sapling stand back up so it can blow around in the wind, get that stink out there. But I'm not sure if that's the best way to go about it or not. I said I've never done a bear bait before. If any of you guys have and you have some ideas and tips for me, feel free to shoot me an email with your ideas at dansgunstuff@gmail.com, and I'll read them. Any advice is welcome. I'll even read your comments on the show. We'll probably do a bear baiting episode at some point if I do this spring. But anyway, yeah, either way, it has been a long winter, and I hate this time of year when it looks like it should be nice out and you want to go out and do things, but you really just can't yet. I don't own a snow machine right now, unfortunately, as my last one caught fire a couple of years ago, and I haven't been able to replace it yet. The prices on those things for what I want for a utility machine is crazy right now. So I'm stuck waiting till the snow melts enough I can use my four wheeler or my pickup or the Jimmy to get out where I want to go. Regardless of the snow, it's still not thawing out yet. Oh, okay, wait, hold on a second. There we go. Regardless of the snow, and it's still not thawing out yet, I've been busy working all week as a independent contractor for the city dump. They needed cover material for the landfill, so I've been up there with a rental excavator chipping away at the frozen gravel pit and making usable material for them. Not very fun work, but it's something to keep me busy and get a little money in the bank, which is, this spring, with everything that happened this year, the bank account is looking a little thinner than I'd like it to. And of course, me buying new guns doesn't help that, but I can't help myself. So get a little extra money rolling in is always a good thing. All right, guys, cigar time. I was getting burnt out about talking about those Tatiana cigars, and while I still have a handful of those left to smoke and evaluate, I'm not smoking one this week. Since I've been working all week, I actually smoked several cigars this week, not just here. Normally during the winter, I only smoke cigars if I go to Fairbanks by myself, or if I'm, like when I was renting the shop, I'd smoke one out there. Now that I'm doing the podcast, part of the reason to do a cigar in the podcast is it gives me an excuse to go out and smoke a cigar. I like cigars. But in the summer, when I'm working, I'll usually have at least one cigar a day. If we're paving, I'll smoke 3 or 4 a day. And on that paver, slow, sitting up there, nothing to do other than try to drive a straight line. Cigars, it's nice to have a good cigar. But long days at work and all that kind of stuff has led me to enjoy the fatter and longer lasting cigars. And I generally prefer the flavor profile of a fatter cigar as well, like a Gordo. And since I'm smoking a lot, I also like budget cigars because I'm not made out of money. I make decent money in the summer, but I have to make it last all year. So I'm more budget friendly with my cigars. I don't smoke $20 cigars all the time. So this is the Chillin Moose cigar from Foundry. And this was actually the first cigar I ever smoked. I think it was a Corona size, and I picked it specifically because of the band having a moose on it. I'm from Alaska. I was down in Idaho at the time, and actually out in my toolbox in my shed, I was working for a company at that time where I had my toolbox at their shop, and the band of that cigar is still stuck in the top of my toolbox, up in the lid. I think I used some sticky like adhesive spray on the band and stuck it in there like a sticker. So this cigar has become a staple in my collection. When I first started smoking, I smoked a lot of new things, but now that I keep cigars on hand, this is one I always keep on hand. It's a great cigar. Generally, I get the Robusto since the Gigante, they call this the Gigante, the 6x60. Normally online, these are out of stock. The box I have right now is actually the first box of Gordo 6 size cigars I've ever gotten. So the Chillin Moose, it's a mild to medium bodied cigar. It has a Connecticut wrapper. I'm not usually the biggest fan of Connecticut wrappers. I say that, but then there's a lot of Connecticut wrapper cigars I do like this one. The price on this cigar from Cigars International is $66.99 a box, which comes to $3.35 a stick. And I actually have a box right here that I'm using for my ashtray. So they actually come in a nice wooden box. It's particle board, but it's still a nice box. It's not a paper bundle like what a lot of cheaper budget cigars come in. And I can actually look, and this box, it was a box of Coronas 5x50s. So there you go. I don't always get the fat side. I'll get what they have in stock. So and that $3.35 a stick price is for the Gordos. The cheaper, the smaller sizes are obviously a little bit cheaper. Now, start that over. Now, I mentioned that generally I like a fatter cigar, and this cigar is one of the exceptions. I find the bigger ring gauge in this cigar to have a little bit of bitterness for the first inch or so. Now that I've got it smoked down a little bit, it's smoothed out. It's a great cigar. I smoked about 5 out of this box of 20, and they've all been the same way. So on this cigar, I actually prefer the Robusto size. Even though it has just a little bit of bitterness at the start, it's not harsh. It's still a fairly mild cigar. And like I said, that bitterness goes away after the first inch or so. It's just got a little bit of an odd flavor when you first light it up. So even with the little bit of bitterness, though, this is still a fantastic smoke. And I would get it again in this size if that was all that was available. I prefer the Robusto, but this is still a great smoke. The Chillin Moose is one of the best budget sticks, in my opinion. And I have not had one to date that I didn't like. It has a super even burn. You guys can see it's nice, even burn. I didn't start it with torchlight or just a regular old Bic. I know you're not supposed to do that, but it's what's out here. Torchlighters don't work very good in the cold. But yeah, one of the best budget sticks in my opinion. I've not had a bad one to date. Super good burn, good smoke output, good flavor profile. Just a really good, mild mannered cigar. Great cigar for a beginner. The cigar pairs really well with a cup of black coffee I've got on there drinking, and I'm really enjoying it. Some good coffee too. Okay, let's talk about carry pistol mods. This is a bit of a controversial subject with some people saying that carry guns should be left 100% stock and others adding every bell and whistle you can think of. My opinion is that there are a few mods that are worth it. And some that are even necessary depending on the gun model, like an ambi safety on a 1911, for me being that I shoot left-handed. Today we're mostly going to be talking about my opinions and the mods I did to my Glock 19. But a lot of this goes towards other platforms as well. You guys can take everything with a grain of salt. Now, with the Glocks, they have become a little bit of a cult classic gun, and everybody makes aftermarket parts for them, and everybody builds them. And it's easy to end up spending more on parts to upgrade the gun than you originally spent on the gun, and possibly end up with a gun that's less reliable. So when I bought this Gen 3 Glock 19, I actually had every intention of keeping it stock. I'm not the biggest fan of Glock. I've always said that. You guys know that. But a carry gun is a tool. So if it does the job, it doesn't have to be fancy. I just needed to go bang every time. The gun I was carrying before wasn't doing that. So I got the Glock again. My 1911 goes bang every time. Super reliable. It's a little heavier. It doesn't hold as many rounds. It's a nice gun, so I don't want to beat it up at work. So I got the Glock. However, I forgot about one thing with the Glocks, and that is the plastic sights. And now this may not be an issue everywhere. The Glock sights are not a great setup anyway, with the white dot front and the outlined rear, but the plastic was the issue for me. Let's put that down. So in the cold, the plastic shrinks more than the steel does, and the sights get loose. And I had forgotten about that until a few days into carrying the 19 when I took it out of the holster after working outside, and the rear sight was about halfway out the notch to the right. No, and that's the side it would have been. I carried on my left hip, so if it got bumped into it, just pushed the sight in towards my body. So one thing I do recommend changing on the Glocks is the sights. In my case, I went with the Trijicon HD. You guys on YouTube should be able to see that kind of if his window's not too bright. So that's the Trijicon HD night sights. But there are a lot of good options out there for sights for the Glocks. Again, a super common gun. Everybody makes sights for this thing. And I may actually end up changing these sights at some point. The Trijicon HD are a 3-dot night sight with a painted halo around the front tritium for daytime use, and I'm not sure if you guys will be able to see that in the camera. But yeah, it's got like an orange halo around the front tritium. They make it in green and a couple other colors too. Now, in a combat pistol, the front sight is the most important thing to focus on. So making it easy to see is good. But on these sights, they put some kind of a clear coat or something over the orange halo and the tritium. Probably it might be an epoxy to hold it in, whatever. But it reflects light really bad, making the front sight hard to focus on if I have sun behind me. It's like this little glittery blob out there on the front sight, almost like this reflects light really bad. And I'm not a big fan of that. It makes it hard to see the sights. I'm going to give them a little bit of time to see if this goes away once they wear in a little bit. Maybe, with a little bit of abrasion and using the gun, it'll kind of dull it out a little bit and won't reflect quite as bad. But I'm not real thrilled with that reflection right now. And it may not be an issue for like full-on combat shooting if you're a cop or that, whatever. But I'm not always focusing on the orange dot. Sometimes I want to see the top of the sight so I can, for target shooting and that kind of stuff. And it makes it hard for that. So normally with sights on pistols, I prefer just plain flat black faces and square blade front sights and square black notch for the rear. This is the first time I've ever actually put tritium sights on a pistol. And other than that light reflecting off the front sight, I really like the setup. That big orange dot is super easy to pick up for for quick, trying to get quick shots on target. Now, the next thing that I think is a good upgrade on the Glocks is stippling, or grip tape. The newer Gen 5 pistols have a little bit of an enhanced grip texture compared to these earlier ones, but the earlier generations leave something to be desired. Especially if your hands are wet with water, blood, or even worse, fish slime. If you guys have ever been out fishing and dealing with that slime and then you got a bear charging, you got to try to grab your gun. You don't want a slippery gun. So on this G19, I actually, I'll try to show you guys. I'm not sure if the camera will pick it up, but I actually stippled this one myself. And I stippled it with an aggressive sprinkle pattern stippling. But not everybody is capable of doing this themselves. There's some great videos about it on YouTube if you want to learn. The factory Glock boxes that everybody throws in the trash. You can practice on the box, or buy some cheap AR mags and practice on those, and then go to town. That's where I learned how to do them, was on AR mags. I'd make a mark with a Sharpie around the mag well on my gun, and I'd stipple everything below that. And the first couple I did weren't that great. I've been doing, I think this is the 4th or 5th one I've done now, and it turned out pretty good. The borders could be a little better, but it didn't cost me anything either, and it's serviceable. And it's not completely ugly. I mean, it turned out decent. I'm 99% happy with this stippling job. A couple things I wish were a little better, but it's pretty good. So on that same hand, I mentioned doing this one myself. Professional stippling jobs, whether done by hand or laser etched, is becoming more common now. Uh, I was looking online; it's about $200 to $250 starting price, and it can go all the way up to $450, $500 for a stippling job on a full size, like a Glock 17 or something. And I'm not a real big fan of spending money if you don't have to. So while I do think that actual stippling is better, there's a lot of good grip tapes on the market, and they bring a lot to the table as far as grip enhancement. So if you don't want to spend $200 on a stippling job and you don't want to risk damaging the frame doing it yourself, that's a great way to go. I haven't looked up the price of like the Talon grips or anything like that, but I think they're like around $25-$30. And skateboard tapes, you can do that. Nick, the guy that used to be on the podcast with me, he's a fan of the Goon tape. There is options that are a lot cheaper than a $200 stippling job. This is a good cigar. I like this cigar. Still one of my favorites. So, one of the things I did do to mine when I stippled it was to grind the finger grooves off. And you guys can see that there's no finger grooves anymore. And I also reduced the back of the hump just slightly, just as much as I could get away with without cutting. You guys can see that there's a secondary like pocket there in the back in front of the magazine. And you can cut that back strap off and really reduce the size of the grip. I don't get into that. I just grind it down as much as I can where that hump is, as much as I can get away with, and then I stipple it. Some of the professional stipplers will do the full grip reductions on the Glocks, like I was just talking about, if you send them out for work. I mentioned before on episode 35 that the finger grooves didn't bother me that much on this gun, and while that is true, and I could have shot the gun fine without removing them, I much prefer the way the grip feels in the hand now. It feels a lot better for me, and it fits my hand better. So the next upgrade I did on this one was the trigger, and we need to talk about this just a little bit. I'm going to take the band off this cigar real quick, and we'll get back to the podcast part. It's all the stuff you guys don't get to see when you're listening to the audio version, or watching the audio version. You don't get to see me or listen to me smoking a cigar and all that. All gets edited out. Okay, where was I here? Okay, here we go. First off, this is not really a necessary upgrade, but it's nice. I shot this gun a bunch with the factory trigger, and it works. And for a self-defense gun, you probably don't really want a light trigger, especially if you're a newer shooter and not real familiar with lighter triggers. Now, for the Glocks, I've mentioned there are a lot of aftermarket parts on the market, and triggers are no exception, and they can get really spendy. Johnny Glock, you can send it off to him for $400 and he'll get you a 2-pound trigger in them. But that's a lot of money. The gun didn't barely cost about $419. So the Zev trigger that I had in my Glock 34 was about $250 when I bought it 5 years ago. And there's a cheaper way to majorly upgrade the Glock triggers, and really most of the fancy Glock triggers are nothing more than this and a fancy shoe. Flat face shoe. Some of them have take-up adjustment and that kind of stuff, but they're basically all just a kit like this. So go to the Terran Tactical and get the TTI Grandmaster Connector Kit. There are a few other kits like this on the market, and the Ghost connectors and all that, but the Terran Tactical Kit I have used, and it works well, and they're popular in the competitive shooting community. I think those kits are around $40, and it will take the 7+ pound factory Glock trigger down to under 5 pounds. Depending on the gun, they'll go down to about 3 pounds, but every gun's a little different. So it comes with a lighter striker spring, which I have used, but I wouldn't recommend that for a carry gun. But the rest of the springs, like the trigger return spring and all that, I would put in. Pair this with polishing a few parts and a few of the parts, or you just have a... Okay, hold on a second. Pair this with polishing a few of the trigger parts, and you will have a decent and usable trigger. And this is what I had in my G22, and it worked well. I never had any misfires from that gun, and the lighter striker with the lighter striker spring, but starting to mess with the striker and springs opens a whole new can of worms and can make the gun unreliable. But the lighter you make the trigger spring, the lighter the trigger pull will be, since on the Glocks, the trigger pull also cocks the striker the rest of the way. Now, if you really want to cheap out, just spend $15 on a Ghost 3.5 pound connector and polish your trigger parts wherever they touch. You know, where the trigger bar pushes up the firing pin block, polish that, polish the striker face, all that kind of stuff. And you can make a pretty decent trigger with a few bucks worth of parts. Now, on this Glock 19, I did something completely different and new. When I was last shooting Glocks, this trigger didn't exist, and it is a game changer. And we need to talk about that just a little bit. Keep in mind real quick that before I ordered this trigger, I sent Timney an email and requested the trigger for review. And I didn't hear back from him for a few days, so I ordered the trigger with my money. And then a couple of days ago, they finally got back with me and offered to send me one. My opinion on the trigger was already made up before they offered to send me one. This is my honest thoughts on the trigger. Paid for the trigger with my own money. They offered to send me another trigger for review in the future, and I'll probably take them up on that. But this trigger, I paid for. Timney's a great company. They've been around a long time. My dad put Timney triggers in all of his guns when I was a kid. They make great stuff. They've been around a long time. Good family-owned company. They put Bible verses on all their stuff. I like to see that. I like doing business with Timney. So, as I just mentioned, I put a Timney trigger in this pistol, and it is the Timney Alpha Competition trigger. And they did not exist until more recently. I think about a year ago is when they came out. Now, keep in mind that Timney does not recommend this trigger for carry. So, I probably shouldn't either. If you put the trigger in your gun and you shoot yourself in the foot, don't come crying to me. Getting a little cold out here, and I'm starting to get the cigars starting to get a little tight. There we go. Okay, so the trigger. Timney claims it is a drop-in and recommends using all the factory parts like the connector, the striker, the spring, and all that. And mine went right in the gun with no issues. Took me about 5 minutes to put it in, and it is hands down the best Glock trigger I have ever felt. I mentioned before changing the connectors and springs, and while this does make the trigger lighter, it generally does not shorten it, and makes it feel kind of mushy, squishy, whatever. Changing the trigger shoe on one that has take up, for take up adjustment helps, but they usually leave something to be desired. At least for me, I'm used to nice crisp 1911 triggers, revolver triggers, and that kind of stuff. Usable triggers for sure, but room for improvement if you are used to a good trigger. Now, I said that in my opinion. Okay, hold on. Now, I said that in my opinion, this Timney trigger is a game changer, and here is why. You guys on YouTube will be able to see that this trigger, flat face trigger, is exactly 3 pounds. It's got a little bit of take up. You guys can see that. Just a little bit of take up. Then a nice short, crisp release, and then it's got a nice positive reset. This trigger is almost 1911-ish. It would be a decent trigger in any gun, but it is excellent in the Glock. I would go as far as saying this is a phenomenal trigger in the Glock. It is the best trigger I've ever felt in the Glock. We'll do that one more time. A little bit of take up. Nice, short, crisp release. 3 pounds even. And it does come with a take-up adjustment. I left it the way it was set from the factory. It's really good the way it is, but there is some take-up. I could reduce that take-up on that trigger with the adjustment on there. I haven't yet. I'm probably not going to. Starting to try to go out of me. I'm not happy about that. And since it's cold out here, my coffee's getting cold. So Timney gets this really great trigger pull by doing away with the trigger cocking of the striker, and has the striker at full cock at all times, with the trigger only releasing the striker. Now, some people online claim that there is a possibility for drop failure, but remember that even if the sear did fail and allow the striker to drop, there is still a firing pin block on the Glock pistols. And since the sear drops straight down, I figured that the best way to try to get it to release without pulling the trigger would be to bring the gun down and impact the butt on something hard and try to drive that sear down to release the striker. And I took out to the woodpile and vigorously beat the butt of the pistol on a log to the point I damaged the magazine that was in the gun, and I couldn't get it to go off. But, take my opinion with a grain of salt and use your own best judgment. You can see the video of me beating the gun on the woodpile during the trigger review video that I put on my YouTube channel. I don't normally do videos like that, but I was highly impressed with this trigger. Now, a friend of mine bought this trigger for his Gen 3 Glock 17C, and he has a ghost connector in it, and I would assume an aftermarket striker and spring, but I don't, just from what he has told me, but I don't know for sure. It was all in the gun when he bought it. He was told it's Zev stuff, and after looking at it, it's not. I can tell it's got a ghost connector and that kind of stuff. It's got a factory trigger shoe. Somebody got him on that. But that's a story for a different day. So he put the trigger in that gun with that ghost connector, and the trigger was not letting the sear drop enough to release the striker. Now, he's in Washington. I don't have the ability to check the gun out in person and see why it's not working right for him, but I would assume that it has to do with the aftermarket connector. The aftermarket connectors on the Glocks, they reduce the angle that the trigger bar hits it at. So the factory ones, they say they're like this. The trigger bar comes in and it hits it at a real steep angle. So the aftermarket ones have a lower angle on them. So it makes that transition a little bit smoother. And I'm guessing that with the aftermarket trigger, it's just not pushing the trigger bar down far enough to release the sear. So I recommended to him to put a factory connector in it and try it again. And I haven't heard back from him on that at this time. But I know he will get it to work. And there's a couple of videos that Timney has on their website about tweaking these triggers if people have problems with them like that with aftermarket strikers, connectors, and all that kind of stuff. Now, for the guys that are worried about the striker staying fully cocked on this trigger, there are a lot of other guns on the market that have that fully cocked striker from the factory, and the new Glock Performance trigger uses this same method of holding the striker fully back as well. Now, one other thing that I haven't changed on this gun yet, and I plan to, but I haven't shot the gun enough to need to change the recoil spring, but I would recommend changing out the recoil spring guide rod and getting rid of the plastic one. I will be doing that on this gun when I replace the recoil spring the first time. I'll get probably a Wolf or Wolf, or no, Lone Wolf. There we go, Lone Wolf Glock part. Probably get a Lone Wolf spring kit and do away with the plastic guide rod. That's something I do recommend doing. And that's it on this model 19. Okay, hold on. Man, I'm getting all flubbered today. And that's it on this model 19. That's all I really recommend doing. Anything more than that is really just unneeded. Sure, there are fancy slides and the gold colored barrels that look cool, and they probably have some function, the light and slides and all that. But the gun works fine the way it is. It's a carry gun. You want to build a race gun, build a race gun. You want to build a carry gun, you want it to be reliable. It's good enough. Just like that. You don't need any more than that. really, the Glocks work pretty good fully stocked. They're known for being extremely reliable in their stock form. That's why I went with Glock this time for a carry gun. But there's always some room for minor improvements like the sights and the stippling and all that kind of stuff. Now, one more thing about the Glocks, and it's not going to be an issue with this 19, because I'm not going to be shooting plus P plus 9mm out of it constantly, but most of them have unsupported chambers, and rather loose chambers at that. There we go, it's going good again now. The 10mm Glocks have been known to have issues with barrel loads and hot 10mm loads because of this. So if you want to shoot a steady diet of hotter ammo out of the Glocks, it's probably worth upgrading the barrel to one that has a fully supported chamber. I think the newer Gen 5 pistols have addressed this issue somewhat, but I can't say for sure. My G22 had an aftermarket barrel in it when I got it that was a fully supported chamber. My G34 had a stock barrel, but I got noticeable accuracy improvements when I put an aftermarket barrel in it. It's just, just something to keep in mind. Now, let's talk about cost. When I bought this 19, I mentioned here on the podcast that one of the reasons I went with the Gen 3 was because of the lower cost compared to the Gen 5. And now that I spent $250 in parts, it seems like a moot point. Why not just buy the Gen 5? And that's fair. But I would argue that the trigger and the sights on this gun are now better than the Gen 5 would be anyway. And for me, the stipple job didn't cost anything. I would have done that on the Gen 5 anyway, even though the grip texture on those is a little bit better. These are all upgrades I probably would have done to the Gen 5 anyway, so there's no real reason to start with the more expensive model. The only thing that the Gen 5 offers for me over the Gen 3 would be the ambidextrous controls. And I have mentioned before that the mag release is no issue. I've gotten so used to dropping the mag with my index finger, I don't use the ambidextrous mag release on guns I have that do have it anyway. It's just habit. I do it the same way every time. And then the other thing that the Gen 5 has would be a ambidextrous slide stop. And again, I don't use that. If I run a gun to mag lock, I put my new mag in it and I'm going to grip it and rip it and I'm going to let it go. So those aren't really advantages to me. New shooters, probably. If you're going to buy all new guns and you're a left-handed shooter and go out and buy all guns that are ambidextrous, fine. There's a lot of really good ambidextrous guns on the market now. I grew up shooting 1911s and Ruger 22s and this, that, and the other that didn't have that. So I've gotten used to using my index finger to drop the mag and grip and rip. So that's just the way I do it now. Having those features on there, I'm not really going to use them. And so yeah, that about sums up my thoughts on the Glocks and modifications. If you want to spend $2,000 on Zev parts and build a fancy Glock, go ahead. If you want to go get a Terran Tactical Combat Master like John Wick uses in the movies, be my guest. But the reality of it is, I just don't think most of those modifications are needed to make a reliable, dependable, and accurate self-defense handgun. Coffee gets cold fast at 20 degrees outside. Okay, guys. I almost didn't do this today, as I'm trying to be more positive on the reviews I do. I pissed a lot of people off saying their products are crap, and other people in the industry have commented on that, and they're right. I shouldn't always rag on products. So I wasn't going to do this today. But we're talking about the Glocks today anyway. And sometimes someone has to be honest when something doesn't work the way it should. Now, I'm not sure if I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I know I have on social media, some of the articles I've wrote, some of my old YouTube videos. But I used to work with Men2 magazines as part of, I was kind of like a brand ambassador. I'd post for them on social media, run their products, talk about it, promote their products, and try to sell help sell their products for them. I know the guy that owns the company. Really good dude. I've been to their headquarters there in Idaho Falls. They make fantastic AR magazines, and I still use and promote those magazines. You guys need some good AR mag? Go out and buy yourself some Men 2 magazines. They're cheap. They're American made. They're made by patriots that are really good, hardworking, blue-collar American guys. Really good AR mags. When they first started making Glock mags, I was shooting USPSA, and that's when I started shooting the Glock 34 so that I could run their magazines, and they didn't work very great. When shooting competitively like that, the mags are going to get dropped in the dirt. It's just a fact of life. You're running around a course, or a stage, and you need to reload. You're not going to pocket the magazine. You're going to drop it in the dirt and pick it up when you're done with your stage. Or sometimes the guy following behind you doing time will pick them up for you. And those mags absolutely would not work dirty. You get a little bit of, down there in Idaho, we were shooting out, in the dust and that kind of, you get a little bit of dust in those magazines, and the followers would jam, stick inside the magazine, and even with the tiniest amount of dust. I was able to use factory followers in them, and then they would work, and I ran them like that for competition, but they wouldn't work very good out of the package, and I actually quit running them because I couldn't promote them. Because even though mine worked great, if you go buy some off the factory shelf, they weren't going to work very good for the conditions that I was using them in. I had to change out the followers to make them work for my needs. So when I was looking for a couple spare mags for the Glock 19 a couple weeks ago, and I saw the Men 2 magazines at Sportsman's Warehouse, and I figured, what the heck, I'd go ahead and grab a few and see if they'd improved them. The base pads look different than they used to, so I figured maybe they'd improve the mags and work the bugs out. Well, it turns out not so much. While I didn't deal with any sticky followers this time, the magazines will all consistently lock back every single time with one round left in the gun, which is super annoying. And also, I didn't really get a chance to get them dirty since there's still snow on the ground here, and hard packed snow, like out in the driveway where I'm shooting at, doesn't really get stuff dirty or even wet. So I wish I could recommend these magazines, but I just can't. I really hope these guys get it together and produce some better Glock magazines because I like the guys, I like the company, and I love their AR magazines, but the Glock mags from Men 2 leave a lot to be desired. Okay, so last week I posted the YouTube link on the Jeff Cooper Scout Rifle Facebook page because it was a Scout Rifle episode, and I'm talking to some of those guys about the rifle build and all that kind of stuff. So I've been posting. So that was the first Scout Rifle episode I did with a YouTube video also. So I went ahead and posted the YouTube video, a link to it on the page, and then a note about listening to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts at. And I got the comment here, and I'm going to go ahead and read it, and I'm going to go ahead and try to explain a little bit for the new listener. So here's the comment that I got on that post. Okay, first, I give you credit for doing a video and putting it out there, but if I'm going to be honest, I have some issues here. First, if you have a title that mentions scout rifles, the first 5 to 10 minutes shouldn't be you rambling on about 9mm ammo, or at least say something like, hey, we'll be talking about the Scout Rifle here shortly, but first. And then maybe say why. I started skipping around the video to see when you'd be talking about the Scout Rifle, and that's bad. People aren't very patient these days. Get to the point. Second, it looks like you're doing this while sitting on the john. Background and atmosphere do matter. It's why TV shows spend a ton on sets, etc. Third, ditch the cigar. It added nothing and made you seem like you're out at the bar, not making a serious video. And lastly, how does one do a gun video with no gun? I say all this with absolutely no intent of upsetting you. You ask for criticism, there you go. I hope it helps, and keep doing them. Just like TV shows, the first season can be shaky, but if you get good material, the presentation improves as you keep doing it. This is a great comment. I'm always talking about wanting to try to improve the show, and I can't do that if I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And he made that comment about the TV shows and the first season being a little shaky. He's right. This is only like episode 8 since I've rebooted the podcast. I'm still trying to get into a groove here, and it's only like episode 4 since I started putting them on YouTube. That's a whole new thing. And I told you guys I don't have the best setup for that, and I was just going to try to get it out there anyway because people were asking. Okay, so for the first part of that comment, he mentions getting to the point. And I get this to an extent, but while this is a podcast, and it is about shooting and guns, it's also my podcast. And most of you guys enjoy hearing about what's going on with my life and here in Alaska and everything like that. However, I'm going to try to start the podcast out each week by telling you what the main subject will be and try to hold the attention for the newcomers that are here for the main subject if they come across the podcast and click because of the title of the episode. If you notice, I did that with this episode. That is a great comment. That's a great idea. Something I'd never considered about with newcomers, especially on the YouTube side, coming in and not knowing what's going on. Great stuff right there. Second part about the background. I'm doing the best I can with what I have right now. You guys remember the guys that have been listening to the podcast, it started out of the podcast, and the YouTube video part is new because you guys asked for it. And I don't have the best recording spot right now. You guys know I'm out here recording in my camper because it's the only real quiet place I have. So, yeah, I hope to get a nice gun room eventually, with some nice background and all that kind of stuff and do the podcast in there. But for now, I'm working with what I have. If the background really bothers you in the video, just go listen to the audio version somewhere, wherever you listen to podcasts at. I'm working with what I've got. And I agree with you that it bothers me that the videos look crappy and that I can't edit them right now. It bothers me. Trust me. Every week, I almost don't put them out there. But you guys have asked for them, so I'm doing it. I'm kind of OCD. I like things to be perfect. Even the podcast right now, the audio problems I'm having and all that kind of stuff, it bothers me more than you guys think. I'm working with what I've got. And because you guys kept asking for the show. I actually quit doing the show because I didn't have the right setup. And then people were asking me to start doing the show again. So I started doing the show again. And I like doing the show. And the only thing I can do is keep trying to make it better. And I'm going to keep trying to make it better. I can't build an add-on onto the house right now. There's no room in the house. It's the middle of winter. I can't just go build a room off the side of the house to start podcasting in. I can't go build a shed that's insulated and heated and nice background, all that kind of stuff. There's 3 feet of snow on the ground still. So we're going to be recording out of the camper for a while. It is what it is. And lastly, that part about no gun and his comment. Sometimes I do bring things on the show and talk about them and show them to you guys now that we're doing a YouTube video. Like I brought the Glock today and we're showing stuff on them. But again, this is mostly intended to be a podcast, and you can't see things in the audio version anyway. Maybe eventually I'll start doing YouTube videos again like I used to do that'll be more YouTube-centered, but for right now I'm focusing on the podcast, and the YouTube is just a bonus for the people who asked for it. But again, Dennis, thanks for the comment. This is exactly the kind of stuff that makes me think about how to make the show better. I want to make the show better. I can't do that without your guys' criticism telling me what I need to change and make better. Excellent comment. No offense taken whatsoever. I've got thick skin. It takes a lot more than that to hurt my feelings. Alrighty, guys. Well, I think that about does it for this episode. Right now, while I'm working on trying to build the podcast back up and get it back up off the ground, I'm also trying to build up my social medias again, Instagram, YouTube, and all that. The main one I'm working on right now is trying to build is Instagram with a goal of 1,000 followers. And I'm getting really close. I'm playing that follow game, which is brutal. It's hard to do. It's not fun. People get mad if you unfollow them and follow them again real soon by accident. But I also don't want to follow 5,000 accounts from my side that have nothing to do with really what I want. Trying to get that 1,000 followers. They say once you get 1,000 followers, that they'll start to kind of organically grow. So I need to get to that mark, and I need to reach at least 5,000 before some of these companies will start to work with me. I've sent emails out for product requests and that kind of stuff to review stuff on the show or work with people, and they all say they want to see 5,000 to 10,000 followers on Instagram. So I need to get that built up a little bit. You guys can help me reach this goal by following the Shooter's Apprentice on Instagram and other social media platforms and sharing with your friends. The Shooter's Apprentice can be found on most social media platforms. You guys watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, and that stuff helps. Building subscribers is what helps build the channel. The more subscribers I have, the more opportunities I will get to get stuff to review and talk about and that kind of stuff. If you guys have any questions or comments, be sure to email me at dansgunstuff@gmail.com or comment on the social media pages or message the social media pages. You guys that have my cell phone number, shoot me a text. I'm always open to chatting with you guys. A lot of you guys have been listening for a while. It's still a small show. Most of you, I would probably know most of the listeners by name still to this show. A lot of you guys are friends. Shoot me a text. Let me know how I'm doing. Any ideas you have, dansgunstuff@gmail.com. That's all I've got for this week, guys. I'm not sure what the topic will be next week. I've got a couple ideas. I'm not sure which way it's going to go, but I will see you guys then. Until next time, stay safe out there, and don't shoot yourself in the foot.